Hi, folks. Hassan Ahmed here once again on the HMA Law Firm channel. I'm pleased to introduce today one of a great friend and a colleague and someone who has worked with us for going on 6 or 7 years now, and that's Hamza Kazmi, one of the other attorneys at our firm. I wanted to bring Hamza on to talk about a topic that's actually very near and dear to me, that really shapes and has shifted the direction of the practice of the firm for quite a few years now. And I think it's an appropriate time to talk about this because we are almost exactly 5 years after the first Muslim ban, when Hamza and I and dozens or perhaps hundreds of other attorneys showed up at Washington Dulles Airport to try to control some of the chaos that had been unleashed by the then nascent Trump administration when they tried to ban people from majority Muslim countries. People got together at airports around the country, and we tried to do our part at Washington Dulles Airport, and that was on January 28th, 2017, and that weekend. So here we are in February of 2022, almost exactly just over 5 years later. And looking back, that night actually did a lot to shift the direction of our practice. And Hamza has stood side by side with us during that time. And I'm really anxious to hear some of his thoughts about advocacy and how it melds in with the practice of law.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I'm excited to dig into this. It seems unreal that it's been 5 years since Dulles, but yeah, you're right. It absolutely did serve as a major change for the firm and its outlook and what we took on as our role. Because prior to the Muslim ban, we were certainly operating in our role as advocates for our clients and fiercely advocating, I would say. But in the lead up to the Muslim ban, and then very much after it, I think it became apparent to all of us that the firm needed to take on advocacy not just for our individual clients, but for immigrants and aliens, broadly speaking, because the political forces that were being marshaled against them were going to roll over everyone in their path unless there was broad spectrum pushback against them. It wasn't enough to just advocate for our individual clients who had retained us. In order to do that, in order to protect them, it was necessary to speak out on a much broader scale and speak out for folks who we didn't have a direct connection with, who hadn't retained us, but needed to have that representation and that voice.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the night that I realized that advocacy, larger advocacy, as you say, writ large, had to become a part of a baseline of client representation. You can't effectively represent an individual client's interests, and some attorneys might, disagree with me here, and that's fine. This is just how I took, and how I think the members of our firm took this obligation very seriously. That you can't effectively advocate for clients on an individual level unless you're at least spending some time and some of your resources fighting against the policies, the genesis of those policies. Where is it actually coming from? You have to be able to speak out on a larger scale. And the fact that we had our feet, on the ground, so to speak, for so long, gave us a unique perspective. We weren't, policy people that had just that were not we were very much in touch with the needs and wants and the struggles of our clients. And we found, I think, a unique niche to be able to actually communicate those stories to the halls of power.
I mean, ultimately, our role as attorneys and advocates in the legal system is to serve as amplifiers and loudspeakers for our clients and help ensure that their stories and their perspectives are heard. And our role as advocates in the broader sense is to do much of the same, is to make sure that their perspectives and the perspectives of other people similarly situated are heard, that they are prioritized and respected, and their rights are protected.
Right, and that they're not unilaterally, the right to tell that story, due process of law is not unilaterally, taken away from them, which seemed to me to be such a hallmark of the anti-immigrant movement, is that they would sit around and say things like that we are just against illegal immigration, and as long as you do it the right way. But meanwhile, every waking hour, every word that they spill is meant on trying to make legal immigration illegal.
Yeah. The anti-immigrant movement very much has a focus on making the right way as tortuous and as clogged up as possible.
Right.
And so then when people continue to try and push through, they'll say, they're doing things the wrong way, and use any excuse to try and keep folks out.
Yeah, Malcolm X said, you don't clip the wings off a bird and then blame it for not being able to fly. And that's exactly what they've been doing, is just continuing to make it just impossible. One example of just the IRA, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, has put all of us attorneys in this dubious position of having to advise our clients to remain in the United States and potentially violate the law because the consequences of leaving and triggering a 10-year bar to re-entry are more onerous, right?
Right.
So you can't tell someone to not break the law, to break the law, but that's effectively what they're going to take away from that, right?
And I mean, our role as attorneys and representatives is to speak out for the best interests of our client.
Right.
And that's our highest priority. And it's entirely legitimate for a client to say that, well, I'd rather face penalties for my current actions than face penalties which are even more severe for me as a result of trying to comply.
Right. Yeah. And it's like there used to be a way to fix things, and in vanishing supply, it's like harder and harder to get people to find a way for people to actually fix the problems that they may have. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and there are small, there are periods of time when things seem to get easier, but then without fail, the general trajectory has definitely been, it's getting harder and harder and more impossible to comply.
Right. And that brings us back to the political advocacy side of things, because advocating for our individual clients is all well and good, but if we don't try and make the system more just on a broader scale, then our clients and those similarly situated are still going to get ground up and chewed up by the system, even if we're doing everything right on our end.
Right.
And that knowledge means it's not enough for us to just stand by. We have to try and make the system more just and to push back against these forces of hate and exclusion.
So let's talk about some of the concrete things that we've done to push back. As you say, what does it mean to be an advocate and a lawyer, or a lawyer and an advocate? What does it actually mean to speak out? What are some of the things that we've done?
Well, let's see. A couple of things are using our specialized knowledge and the experiences of our clients to put together things like op-eds that have been published, pointing out some of the injustices in the immigration system that people may not know about, that wind up being opaque to most of the residents of the US because they're just not things that people consider or look at. But we've also taken on roles in bringing public benefit suits. Our kind of flagship case in this regard is the suit against the University of Michigan, trying to get them to respect Michigan's Freedom of Information Act law and unseal the papers of John Tanton, the architect of the modern anti-immigration movement in the US.
Do you remember the day you and I were in the office together and came up with this idea of filing that FOIA that's led to this 5-year quest?
Yeah, I do. I remember it was just this cascade of improbable events.
Yeah, right.
Like, I think we had been retained by some connection of yours to put together FOIAs.
Something totally unrelated, right?
Yes, it was something about like sending FOIA requests to universities for some sports program things.
Yeah, right.
And they just needed some attorneys to prep these and send them out. So we were starting to get some of those FOIA responses back, and we came across, this was shortly after the Trump administration had come in, and you found this photo of Trump and Kris Kobach posing together. Kris Kobach, I believe, former Secretary of State for Kansas at this point.
I think he's former now, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who had been tapped to lead
DHS. Yeah.
Yes.
To lead DHS at that time, Homeland Security.
And he poses for this photo with Trump, and he's carrying one of those folder portfolios where he's got notes for this and that, and it's a very high resolution photo, and Kris Kobach poses for this photo with Trump, and he has the papers sticking on the outside of the portfolio instead of in it.
He forgot to put his secret plan inside the portfolio for the high-res photos, right?
And this is literally one of the few times where you're actually able to zoom in on the photo,
right?
Enhance, magnify, enhance, and it was sufficiently high resolution that you're able to read Kobach's notes.
Yeah. His secret notes with his secret meeting with Trump.
And it was some sort of, I don't remember the full details off the cuff, but yeah, it was listing plans targeting the
build the wall. That was one thing, was the wall, and he wanted to shut off Syrian immigration entirely. That administration had a special hatred in their heart for Syrians in particular.
And seeing this, I remember you told me about Kobach's connections with groups like FAIR and IRLI.
IRLI, right?
It was news to me. I'd heard of Kobach before, but not really known about these groups. And I remember you telling me about the guy who started all of this.
Yeah, and we knew who he was, this guy John Tanton, but I don't think neither of us really fully appreciated how he was the guy that actually built the entire anti-immigrant movement, the centrality of his role. And then we happened upon we're trying to look for a connection between Tanton and Kobach based on that photo, and we found that Tanton had actually donated his papers to the University of Michigan, and then mysteriously found that half of them had been sealed until April 6th, 2035. And because we had the results of that FOIA that we had filed with the University of Michigan, one of the universities that we filed with was U of M Ann Arbor, we had the FOIA information handy, and so just happened to be at the right place and banged out a Freedom of Information request. And here we are 5 years later. They fought us tooth and nail to keep that out. But it's an important part of this story because the Muslim ban, TPS designation, the revocation of DACA, the public charge rule and how it was expanded under the Trump administration, all these the migrant persecution or protection protocols, MPP, Remain in Mexico, all these attacks on asylum seekers, all of this stuff has roots and can be traced back in some way, shape, or form to the network of organizations started by John Tanton, and that's why we think that his papers need to see the light of day.
Right.
So that's our thing. That's what we've been trying to do now for 5 years.
And in the course of this litigation and this pursuit, I think the process has also continued to shape the further advocacy efforts that you and I and the firm have taken on.
Right.
Like the process of doing our own research and finding out more about Tanton and seeing some of the details about how the Tanton network as a whole put forth these policy proposals that started to flourish under Trump. The process of digging into that and asking these questions put us in contact with more and more people who had been working on this as well. And we're delighted to see that someone's actually using Michigan's laws and statutes to go after these papers.
Yeah, you're right. And this idea of being able to cultivate relationships with others, with, librarians, archivists, journalists, and all the people that we've come in contact with, I think it's really served to amplify our legal reach. I mean, you remember Ella's case, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we took the case when in the wake of the Muslim ban. We had started a group called Dulles Justice Coalition, the airport lawyers, and we actually sat around the clock. A bunch of volunteers sat around the clock for 3 months or so after the first Muslim ban, to help travelers that were potentially stranded. We eventually went sort of virtual in the days before the pandemic, but we continued to take cases from people. And I still remember the day that we got this case of Ella, and that's the name that we're using for her. She was an asylum seeker, but she had a valid visa coming into Dulles Airport, but she was too traumatized based on what had happened to her in her country of Uganda. She was lesbian and had been, it was a horrible story. She just wasn't able to articulate that she was afraid to go back. So she got deported the next day by CBP. We got the case while she was still detained at Washington Dulles Airport. And I tried my best to reach out to her, to reach out to CBP and let them know that, hey, there's an attorney on board. She's traumatized. We are requesting that she be processed for asylum. And all of my requests were ignored.
You were completely stonewalled, despite repeated statements with voluminous evidence that she's suffered significant persecution. Here are details of what happened. They just refused to listen to it.
Completely refused. And it's not like they're, they knew who we were. I told them, I CC'd all the right people and multiple times, and just completely, they didn't even tell her that there was an attorney asking about her. They didn't even do that. And so the next morning she gets deported, and her flight back to Kampala was routed through Dubai. And she was so scared that when she got to Dubai, she ran and hid in an airport bathroom. And, the security guards, everybody's looking for her. And that's when I first actually made contact with her via WhatsApp. And I remember staying up until like 3 a.m, trying to get her story from her. Her luggage flew on, all her belongings flew on. She didn't have anything. And through a combination of working with UNHCR, getting journalists to write about her story, all connections that we had made during the Muslim ban and before, we were able to safely get her registered with UNHCR. They paid for her to live in the Dubai airport for, I think it was about a month or so before we were able to get her to Kenya, where she could enter without a visa. And she stayed there.
Just to note that she had to stay in the airport. She couldn't leave the terminal because she didn't have authorization to enter Dubai itself. the airport is kind of this liminal space that doesn't really count as the
Yeah,
country. So she couldn't leave the airport for, I think it was what, 3 months overall.
it was a while. Yeah, it was a good
And
bit. And yeah.
so like the first 2 months there, like she had the clothes on her back and her travel bag, and that was it.
Else. Yeah, yeah. And we were able to arrange people that I didn't even, brothers and sisters of people that I know, and other people were able to drop off eventually care packages with hygiene products and whatnot, just to make her feel human again while she lived in the airport for that time period. Eventually got to Kenya, got her processed, and all the while we're filing things in Federal Tort Claim Act and requests for reconsideration from CBP to parole her back in, public pressure. Everything was denied. Everything was denied. They did not budge. And ultimately, Canada took her in, and they were just about to reject her application for resettlement. And from what she tells me, she actually submitted what we had filed against CBP in the United States, which did not work with the US government. She submitted that same package to the Canadian authorities. They reconsidered and resettled her, and today she's safely a permanent resident of Canada. Yeah. So yeah, it's one of these things that, being able to amplify, being able to put on a campaign when necessary for your client, and having the ability to connect with journalists and others who can actually write about and amplify and actually push cases forward. I think that's been one of the most powerful, certainly one of the most powerful things in my career. But it's really what I think we mean by incorporating advocacy as a baseline of client representation.
Ultimately, relying on the levers and tools within the existing legal immigration system is insufficient.
Right.
When that system has been designed to grind to a halt and to prevent due process, it's incumbent on us to seek out other tools like public pressure and public support, and try and use those to help our clients and to help others in similar situations.
Absolutely. And we fought this hard and fought this long, and we ain't gonna stop now. So, well, thank you, Hamza. I appreciate you taking the time this evening to talk about this. It's obviously a subject that we all feel very strongly about. Yeah, keep doing you, man.
I think I can safely promise that. And, thank you for having me on, and for deciding to and recognizing the need for the firm to take on an advocacy role all those years ago.
Absolutely.
And for committing to it 110% over these years.
I appreciate that, Hamza. Thanks so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. I'll see you whenever the pandemic allows.
Right, take care.
You too.